Dead of Night was released in 1945 and is a horror movie, but with a few comedic elements thrown in. It concerns an architect who arrives at a home and suddenly gets hit with a bit of deja vu. He feels like he's already had this situation occur, and he feels a sense of impending doom as he correctly guesses what's going to happen next, and he fears he might be stuck in some kind of never-ending loop. It kind of reminds me of Mario Bava's Lisa and the Devil, made many years later. Guests at the country house he is in attempt to reassure him, and they do so by telling him odd stories of their own that they're aware of. There's a doctor at the scene, a psychiatrist or something, a skeptic of prophetic visions and time travelling, and a bit of a game ensures between him and the other guests, as he is challenged to come up with rational reasons for bizarre incidents that occur in each of their stories, and the stories themselves get more and more weird as the film goes on. It's a great setup for a horror anthology movie. The frame story with the man and his deja vu is very interesting, and so are all the mini-stories that the guests tell. Off the top of my head, it's the only anthology movie I've seen where each story gets better as the film goes on. The stories are genuinely scary. There's no jump scares, but the stories are unnerving and unsettling. Creepy is the way to describe this film. It actually had me looking over my shoulder a few times. Anthology movies, especially horror, are so difficult to get right, but this one does the business. The film is British, and that's interesting to note because there wasn't a lot of horror movies developed in Britain during World War II. In fact, they were banned from being made, so this type of film is a rarity. The first character to tell his story does so to get the doctor to find out what he makes of the strange occurrence. It's the mildest of the lot, a little warm-up, and it involves a race car driver who's in hospital after a crash. He sees a hearse with a driver outside his window, and the driver says to him quite creepily, "Just room for one inside, sir." Later, when he's about to board a bus, he sees the conductor that looks exactly the same as the hearse driver, and he repeats the phrase. Spooked, the man decides not to get on the bus, and then he sees it crash into the river. Twilight Zone stuff, maybe an inspiration for the Final Destination movies also. The second story is very chilling. There's a party going on, everyone is laughing and playing, and the entire story has a bubbly atmosphere which perfectly juxtaposes the sense of creepiness and sense of unsettledness, the feeling that something is not quite right, something is off. A young woman is part of a group playing hide and seek in a large mansion, and she comes across a room with a small boy in it, who's scared, and talks about how his sister bullies him. After she comforts the boy and returns to the group, she finds that everyone is bemused and does not believe that she saw a boy in the room, because there isn't a room there. And it just so happens that many years ago a small boy was murdered by his sister in this very house. Spooky. The third story is another cool one, which involves a woman who buys a mirror for her husband-to-be, but he finds that sometimes when he looks into it he sees behind him a room that looks like a king's. He begins to question his sanity, and his wife finds that his behaviour becomes more and more erratic. The next story is a bit more light-hearted, but there is definitely a creep factor to it, a folklore vibe. Two golfers, best friends off the course but fierce rivals on it, decide to play for the company of a woman the two have met. The loser has to leave and not return to disturb the golfer and his new woman. One of the men cheats to win, and he sends the other away, and the guy who walks away, he literally walks into a pond and drowns. It's a really creepy scene, because he just walks straight into the pond without turning left or right or looking around. All that's left is his hat simmering on the water. After this bizarre incident, the golfer sees and hears his old best friend, who calls him a cheat and a swindler. But it doesn't go down a dark path of sinister haunting. This is actually where the story gets funny. The ghost golfer is a bit of an amateur at being a ghoul, and he discusses with his friend that he didn't have a lot of time to study the haunting manual, among other things. He promises to disappear after the living golfer makes amends, but forgets the signal to disappear, and because he has to stay within a 6-foot radius of the person he is haunting, he can't get away from the golfer, even if he wanted to. It's pretty funny, and the two actors share great chemistry. The ending, though, does come off a bit disturbing, as you'd want it to be, given as though this is a horror movie. The best story is the last one. It's very chilling, coming off the back of a fairly light tale. If you're a fan of Slappy from the Goosebumps books, or Chucky from the Child's Play series, I think you'll love this one. It's the most testing story for the Doctor to unravel, and it involves a ventriloquist whose act involves his dummy going off script and being rude to the ventriloquist. But is it an act, or is the dummy alive? The ventriloquist certainly seems to think so, or at least that's what he tells to the detective who's investigating a shooting that the ventriloquist carried out, and he blames the dummy. The dummy itself is very creepy, and overall this story is one you don't want to finish. Your eyes are glued to the screen, wanting to know where the story is going to go next. As far as I'm aware, this was the first time we had seen a creepy dummy in movies, whereas before this they were seen as charming and funny. It's just one example of how influential this brilliant film is, and I give it an 8 out of 10.